Hi, I'm Addison K. Witt, Poet Laureate of the Defense of Democracy and host of this podcast. The attack on America's public school system isn't slowing down, but neither are we. Here you'll meet authors, educators, students, and defenders from across the country who aren't just sounding the alarm, they're answering it. You'll be informed, you'll be moved, and if we've done our job right, you'll be ready to stand with us. This is the Defense of Democracy podcast. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Defense of Democracy podcast. I'm your host, Addison K. Witt, Poet Laureate of Defense of Democracy. Today's conversation couldn't be more timely. Free speech, the very foundation of democracy, is under pressure across America. From book bans to attacks on the media to protests being silenced, the First Amendment is being tested in real time. And understanding what free speech really means is more important than ever. I'm joined today by Ian Rosenberg, a First Amendment lawyer, Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker. You're actually speaking my language. I'm the chair for the Defense of Democracy Film Festival, so that's super awesome. And you're also an adjunct associate professor at Brooklyn College, the author of The Fight for Free Speech, and the co-creator of Free Speech Handbook, a nonfiction graphic novel illustrated by Mike Cavallaro. It makes constitutional law both engaging and accessible. Ian, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks, Addison, for having me on, and thanks for those kind words.
You're very welcome. Well, and thank you for the handbook. I've been going through, and I was just saying earlier that I love when complex issues and topics are more accessible, and you certainly achieved that, I think, with this here. The combination of what is both written and also the graphics are really incredible.
Thank you. Timothy Snyder, the author of On Tyranny, has a great line that wisdom can be condensed. And to that, I've tried to add in without being dumbed down. So that was really the goal, the accessible goal we were striving for, and it's great to hear that it worked for you.
I love that, and I love that extra note without being dumbed down, because you certainly didn't feel that when you're reading it, because it is the actual case studies and laws, and you're really getting your viewpoint of how it worked and why it worked and what changed, what were the outcomes. Let's take a step back to your beginnings. Where are you from, and how did you get from there to where you are today?
Well, if we go all the way back, I was born and raised in Wisconsin, and I went to the University of Wisconsin undergrad, and I was a theater major there, and I took a constitutional law class that changed my life. The professor, Donald Downs, happens to be one of the country's foremost free speech experts. He's a political scientist, not a lawyer. But I just took the class on a lark because I was always interested. I always felt like I would be interested in constitutional law, but I had absolutely no experience with the law or with that type of study. And it really just spoke to me, particularly First Amendment law. But I found that it was very similar to what I loved about drama in terms of reading a text, thinking about it, and then trying to make an argument about it, and maybe convince people of that argument. So I went to Cornell Law School after that, inspired by these classes, and then clerked for a federal judge in Brooklyn, and then worked at Cahill, Gordon, and Reindel, where I had the honor to work with Floyd Abrams, the legendary First Amendment lawyer who argued the Pentagon Papers case. And then after that, I was at ABC News for a long time, over 20 years as an in-house advisor on all issues of First Amendment news gathering and intellectual property law for a number of stations and programs at ABC News. Now I'm the general counsel of a documentary film company called Latchkey Films that make fantastic nonfiction content, including most recently the Barbara Walters documentary, Barbara Walters Tell Me Everything. Just fantastic. Directed by Jackie Jesko, one of the partners at Latchkey. And I think it's not only an amazing look at Barbara's trailblazing career, but it also presents a really phenomenal look at the history of broadcast journalism. So I highly recommend that to people. It's going to be on both ABC and is already on Hulu. So that's the quick run through of my career. I did not think that I was going to be a First Amendment lawyer as a small kid, but it's turned out to be a pretty great adventure.
Uh, Thank you for sharing that, and what a journey. And I'm always so interested in the journey that people take. We do share some crossover. I recall reading about your background, and I was a theater major also. And while I certainly did not pursue law, I've always taken legal courses, studied law in high school in the courses that were provided for high school students. I worked for a law firm in Beverly Hills many years ago, and which was a lot of fun, and it was nothing fancy. I mostly answered phone calls and made calls to courthouses and scheduled appointments and things of that nature. But being in the mix with all the attorneys and the partners who some became friends, it was really great to talk to them and be immersed in that space. I also was a talent manager and agent for many years in
Oh.
Hollywood, and so a lot of legal jargon, contracts, and making sure that people got what they were supposed to get, and finding ways to ask for more or just stand up for the rights of people as necessary. So I was going to ask you about when did you see that path open up for you, but you basically just explained and shared that with us. So as someone who is both a lawyer and storyteller, how do you balance the technical side of law with the need to make these ideas accessible for everyday people?
Well, I actually thank you, Edison. I actually came up with the idea to write my first book, which was the basis for Free Speech Handbook, called The Fight for Free Speech, when I was having a conversation with my kids at the dinner table about the tragedy at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, the murder of students there and teachers. Prompted the national school walkout, and my kids who were in middle school at the time were thinking of participating, but it wasn't being sanctioned by their school, and they were like, "Dad, you're a First Amendment lawyer, or like tell us what's going on here." And I realized in talking to them that if you sort of eliminate jargon and you don't focus on, well, the hundreds of cases that lead up to maybe the main case, that there is a way to tell these stories, and to tell what's important about the law that you don't need a law degree for. There's an expression in law school: the law is like a seamless web, this tapestry that you have to learn everything, because if you pull one thread, it sort of all unravels. And I like to say that this book is more like a rug from IKEA. It's cheap, and it gets the job done just as well. You don't need the whole woven tapestry just to understand what your First Amendment rights are. So I think it's partially that, and the other thing is that I feel like I've learned, one of the things I did at ABC News was being the lawyer for Nightline, in the sort of post-Koppel era, and they're just masters of nonfiction storytelling. So I really feel like I learned a lot from the journalists I worked with, reviewing their work for legal concerns, of course, not editorial or stylistic ones, but just being immersed in that much nonfiction storytelling, particularly with a show like Nightline, which is considered long form, because their segments are like 8 minutes long. So in TV news, that's quite a long time. And so they really care about character, they care about narrative, and they care about, sort of the unexpected moment. And so I feel like these books are really, or these stories in my books, each really revolve around some fascinating, sometimes repellent, but
Mhm.
always fascinating, and sometimes inspiring characters who had some small, or to them big, issue that they needed to express in some small way. And how that path led them all the way to the Supreme Court and ended up defining rights for all of us.
What a rich background you have, and I love that it connects, like it's like everything you've done has brought you to the next place,
Mm,
and it all just seems to work together, and so that's really interesting.
thanks.
Let's talk about Free Speech Handbook for a
Great.
second. This book takes readers through 10 landmark Supreme Court cases. Why did you choose this format, and why a graphic novel?
Uh, Both excellent questions. I'll start with the format because that actually came
Mhm.
before the graphic novel. As exactly as you say, I do focus on 10 key Supreme Court cases from the 1920s to the 2000s. But I begin each chapter, as we've talked about, I begin each chapter with a contemporary issue. So we start with the Women's March on Washington and Madonna jokingly saying that she has thought about blowing up the White House.
Right.
And then that leads us to the key case of Abrams, in which 1920s anarchists threw anti-World War I leaflets from rooftops on the Lower East Side near where I live, and how their conviction under the Alien and Sedition Act, the Espionage and Sedition Act, ended up creating, in dissent, a groundbreaking new idea for the marketplace of ideas. So I try and begin. We also talk about Colin Kaepernick, and we talk
Yes.
about the march in Charlottesville, the Unite the Right racist march in Charlottesville, and each I really wanted to not just have it be only a history book. I wanted it to be a history book that was connected to contemporary questions, and so in selecting these cases, I really thought a lot about not just what will give us the building blocks of an understanding of our First Amendment rights today, but also what cases are directly relevant to questions we have today, and perhaps in surprising ways. So in the Kaepernick case, we talk about Jehovah's Witnesses in World War II era, who refused to pledge allegiance to the flag. And it's not necessarily what you would think would be the direct comparison to the take a knee controversy and protest movement, but there's actually an important link there on the right not to speak, the right to not have the government put in a message in our mouths that we don't want to espouse. So that's sort of the structure of the book. And then why a graphic novel? I was really unbelievably lucky when I had submitted my proposal for the Fight for Free Speech, which was published by NYU Press. My agent had just heard about how Macmillan's graphic novel imprint First Second was launching a new series called World Citizen Comics of civics-oriented nonfiction graphic novels. And my agent was like, "How do you feel about graphic novels?" And I was like, "Well, I love graphic novels. I've been a big fan of Mouse since college, and the March books, the graphic novel retellings of John Lewis's story are I think, seminal history texts." And so she's like, "Well, I'm going to pitch to Mark Siegel, who runs First Second." And it turns out, at the same time, this graphic novelist who I did not know, named Mike Cavallaro, had told Mark that who's published already at that point, had published many graphic novels with First Second, that he was so excited by their new imprint, and he wanted to support them in any way they could. And he's like, "Why don't you check out this proposal?" And so Mike's love of the proposal, who became the artist, and the fact that I quoted the Clash in my proposal, that you have to know your rights. Mike was a former punk rocker before he became an artist. So he ended up being a real instrumental force in deciding that this could be a graphic novel. And what I love about it, that's the sort of inside business, but what I love about it as a graphic novel is I tried really hard to condense these complicated First Amendment stories into about 200 pages in the all textbook, and then we condensed them even further into a 200-page book with pictures. And so it's an even more distilled version, but it's also a richer version because there's so many times that Mike is not only illustrating the people involved, but he's also creating new visual metaphors that enhance our understanding of important legal metaphors. So I think it's a phenomenal format in general, and really does serve the text in incredible ways.
It hits the mark. It really does. And I love that build, actually, because number one, again, you're taking historical precedents or historical achievements, and then making them very approachable. Like, even when I was going through Kaepernick, just it's so layered also. It's not like you don't just touch on it. It's you really give rich contextual information of
Thank you.
what was going on at the particular time in current or most recent history, and then building that up into these cases. And I thought that was it's a nice journey to go on,
Thank
and
you.
with all the visuals along the way, the illustrations along the way, um, just I wish I could show them actually. Just makes it so I don't think you can see, but
Yes,
so
well, there
fun.
you showed briefly the personification of, I believe, the New York Times looking aghast that it's going to be muzzled in the Pentagon Papers. Mike is an incredible, Mike Cavallaro, I highly recommend his work. It's an incredible artist. He has his own series, Nico Bravo and Aewolf, which are these middle grade myth mashups that are phenomenal. I love them, and my kids have loved them. And then he's also worked with a lot of adult artists. He has a novel where he was the artist, a graphic novel called Decelerate Blue, with the Pulitzer Prize nominee or winner, but Adam Rapp, which is phenomenal. And he has a different style for every book. So he does not just have one artistic sort of vision. He really came up with a style that has he will say a nod to Schoolhouse Rock, and
Yes,
has a kind of
yes.
visual immediacy that he's sort of sometimes described it as kind of graffiti comics because it's supposed to feel fast and urgent. And so I can't say enough about his work and what he's added to these stories.
Well, it is great,
Thank you.
and you do get that sense of growing up with Schoolhouse Rock.
Yeah.
You do get that sense as you're reading through. Let's I want to move to pivot a little bit here.
Yeah.
One of the comments you made that has got my attention is that free speech isn't chiseled in stone. It's fought for on an ever-shifting battlefield. What case or story in the book do you think best shows that struggle?
Hmm. Well, I really, I'm trying to do two things. I'm trying to show these individual stories and how they relate stories of the Supreme Court battles and how they relate to contemporary issues. So I like to think of it as like a record album that you could listen. You're only interested in student speech. Well, then you can just read the story about Mary Beth Tinker, and there's an example about how there's nothing about student speech rights or student First Amendment rights in the Constitution or in the First Amendment, but Mary Beth Tinker wears an armband, a black armband, at the beginning of the Vietnam War in her school, middle school in Iowa, to protest deaths on both sides of the tragedy, which was considered both American soldiers and Vietnamese people, which was considered a very radical notion that you would honor the dead on both sides at that point. And based on her small act of courage, it goes up to the Supreme Court, and the court says that students and teachers do not give up their rights to free expression at the schoolhouse gates. And not written in stone. In fact, it had never been written that students have those kind of speech rights, recognizing both Mary Beth Tinker's struggle and implicitly the rights of student activists going on in connection with the civil rights movement before that time and during that time. So what I was going on about the record album is you can sort of focus on just one case, but I really think that if you start at the beginning and go all the way to the end, you will see how at the beginning in the 1920s, which is really the beginnings of modern First Amendment law with this case called Abrams, involving this young anarchist Molly Steimer, a Jewish anarchist on the Lower East Side. She was convicted for speaking out against the war and sentenced to 10 years in prison, her compatriots to 20 years in prison for criticizing the government, which we would today say, how could we have a law that would allow convictions for criticizing the government in leaflets? But that is how our First Amendment laws evolved, and actually evolved only in dissent. She lost her case at the Supreme Court and was later deported to Russia as a sort of better move because she was otherwise in prison in the United States. So yes, our rights evolve over time, and sort of the subtle thing I'm trying to do throughout the book is to keep focusing on that. In each case, our rights are very fragile because they come not from just the Constitution or from some particular law, but they come from individual acts of courage or dissent or outrage. that end up leading to something bigger for all of us. But in every sort of stage, that is so fact dependent and it is so individual dependent. And so our rights are both very fragile and have evolved in a way that I think you can go, whoa, our rights are not set in stone, but also be like, well, this is inspiring because the evolution of our rights really come most of the time from not famous individuals.
I think this is I could go on talking with you about this point forever because it's fascinating because I think the opposite is also true that individuals or groups can come along to devolve or change, alter laws or take them back to something completely different. And so I write political poetry and one of the things that I go back and forth with is that this is democracy and that each generation you have to fight for it. It's not a guarantee that this is what democracy looks like. And there are people who say, I don't like this version of democracy. I want to create my own, or I want something different. And if they happen to be in leadership, then they have a huge platform megaphone. And those of us that believe in moving the democracy that we have forward, got to fight for it.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the sort of unintentional goals, but something I think the books can be a real aid for, is that you can't fight for rights that you don't understand. And you can't fight for rights that maybe you didn't know that you had, or you didn't know that the depth of them. And so I think this is, and also on the other side, you can't, none of these rights that we have or none of these legal metaphors are perfect. There are a lot of flaws with the
Right.
marketplace of ideas. Who is invited into the market? Traditionally, the market excludes Black people and excludes women and excludes other minorities. And the person with the loudest megaphone might be the richest person. And so there's all kinds of reasons why you might also need to. I tell my students that you can't argue against these concepts in productive ways unless you understand them to be able to criticize the elements that you don't like. So both as a way of defending our rights and as a way of pushing forward or changing the way the court has decided things, you really need to know, have a sort of at least core understanding of these rights. And up until now, there are I think this book serves a purpose because that there really isn't a book like this. I really try and tell what the law is. And in fact, Toni Morrison has a wonderful line that I'll paraphrase, that if there's a book out there that you want and it doesn't exist, then you should write it. And there wasn't really the book that I wanted to teach my class because there's a lot of legal textbooks that are too daunting for, I teach masters in communication students. Not just daunting, but just a different
Sure.
project. And then there's a lot of books where people tell you what the law should be. And this is really trying to tell you what the law is. And you can agree with it or you can disagree with it. You can fight to defend those rights or you can fight to change those rights, but you have to know what they are because you're absolutely correct. Both the evolution of our free speech rights and the maintenance of our free speech rights are things that we have to fight for, not just at the Supreme Court, but in our communities, in our classrooms, at our school board meetings, on an everyday grassroots level, which I know is the project of your organization.
It is indeed, and on a personal level, I just always equate it to a family dynamic, and it's the same thing. There are adjustments in families, and not everyone agrees, and then sometimes people are vehemently disagree, and but as a cohesive group, you try to find a way forward. You're not always successful, but you do your best. And so that then, if you zoom out into a much larger community, uh, city, state, country, it's the same on every level that you have to actively participate and know what you're fighting for, know what the laws are that you are fighting for or against.
Absolutely, I love the metaphor of like a difficult family conversation, which is very in tune with the First Amendment kind of view. I think about people from just often disparate perspectives, even if they're from the same communities or from the same areas. having tough conversations. I begin
Yeah.
the fight for free speech with a quote from one of the cases that to paraphrase, is that free speech is powerful medicine in a society as diverse as ours. And I think that's a way to look at it. It's tough. It doesn't cure all problems, and it
Right.
can sometimes be painful or harmful, taken in the wrong ways. But it is something that we need to sort of deal with
Yeah.
and struggle through. But family conversations, I think, are a wonderful way to look at it.
Always important. Okay, right here, I want to take a pause and acknowledge
Sure.
one of the lifelines of defensive democracy, Maris, a dedicated volunteer from South Carolina. Maris has signed up to host a readout event during Banned Books Week, and she's bringing incredible creativity to it. She's planning to partner with a local aquarium, inviting storytellers to come and read banned children's books in that unique setting. This is such a powerful reminder that defending the freedom to read doesn't have to look the same everywhere. It can be bold, creative, and community driven. Thank you, Maris, for showing us how imagination and advocacy can come together to make a difference.
Exactly.
All right, let's continue with our conversation. I've been asking this question to everyone that I talk to. Why should the average American care about censorship in schools?
Uh, well, I mean, I think censorship, as I know you and Defense Against Democracy care so much about, I think censorship in our schools is really a problem for everyone, not just parents, not just students, because as the Supreme Court has said in a recent student speech case, that schools are the laboratories of democracy. That not only I mean, and there are so many reasons why we should care about it, but I'll just pick one that sort of fits with the theme of what we're talking about, which is that we can't sort of model our First Amendment marketplace of ideas. This is a democracy where we have multiple perspectives and multiple viewpoints and multiple backgrounds, unless students can read about those multiple perspectives and backgrounds, unless they can experience ideas that they might find discomforting or that they might find to be a lifeline. But both elements are really valuable, and that there is a right. The First Amendment also includes a right to receive information. I think a lot of times people just sort of think about the right to say what you want. And of course, authors' rights are dramatically impacted by school censorships or library censorships. But it's the freedom to read, the freedom to receive information that is so crucial. I don't think we can view our students as ready to sort of participate in the American experiment, in the democratic experiment, unless they are exposed to the full range of ideas, both to accept and reject, to refine their arguments, to feel comfort and affiliation, and to learn from those who are different. I mean, those are all just so crucial, I think, to students' understanding and to as a not just a springboard for democracy, but also for a model for us as adults for the type of pluralistic democracy that we want to be a part of.
You know, right now, it just feels and seems from everything that we're viewing, we're hearing that our free speech or our speech is under threat in our country and perhaps even around the world. Democracy itself is challenged tremendously globally. You study the history of free speech, you know the laws. Are we in a dangerous moment yet? Or are we just working out a few disagreements?
I have to say the former. We are in a dangerous moment, and I don't think that it serves anyone goals to be unrealistic about that. We are facing First Amendment challenges on certainly every level, from attacks on universities and academic freedom, from book bans on the elementary and high school level, our free press is under attack. And even as we've been seeing with Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel, even the most popular and successful comedians of our time are under attack if they express dissenting views. So I think, when we needed to ring the bell of this is the moment, who knows? But the bell has been rung. The alarm
Right.
bell has been rung. We are certainly in a moment where so many rights are under threat, but I'm only a free speech expert, so I will just speak to those. And this is a moment of threat, and that is why it is more important than ever that people learn about their rights, and I hope through learning about them can make change.
Wow. First of all, I'm very glad that you were very frank with us and just laying it on the line because you do have to face facts and face the truth.
Yeah.
That's really the only way. It's just like you're saying here. You have to know the law, you have to know the facts, what you're talking about, and then face them head on so that you actually can be effective in how you push back, challenge, or shed light
Yeah.
on what's really happening for or how can students or teachers, parents use the lessons in your book as a tool to defend their rights in real life? Because I'm planning on sharing this with a lot of people. So how can we use this in a real world?
Well, so people, I'm so glad to hear that people are thinking about it in that way. And I think there are a lot of ways that this book, even though it was written before some of most of it was written before the current the challenges we're having from this administration, but there are things in there that can really point to people as the way to move forward. For example, the Kimmel controversy that was going on. And that's been happily resolved for him being reinstated. There's a chapter in the book on how satire is protected. And it begins with first term President Trump attacking Saturday Night Live and saying, isn't there anything that can be done about this? And then it tells the pretty shocking story of Reverend Falwell versus Larry Flint, Hustler versus Falwell, a case that involved Hustler magazine publishing a pretty shocking parody ad involving the Reverend Jerry Falwell and he was the founder of the former organization, the Moral Majority, the conservative Christian right organization. And so this talks about how it goes up to the Supreme Court, this some shocking ad, and the conservative at the time, Chief Justice William Rehnquist, sort of holding his nose, says that even sort of gross and pretty outrageous parody is protected because without that, we cannot protect political satirists and political cartoonists that he did care about. And so going to then, how does this help? I think that one of the moments, although we are living in a time when our rights are under threat, I think one of the inspirational aspects of the Jimmy Kimmel situation is that people knew that this was something that they had to keep in the national conversation. I think if this had just gotten sort of steamrolled over in the blitzkrieg of outrages that are happening from the current administration, and it was a one-day story, that his suspension would have been permanent. But because both the creative community got involved and spoke out, but even more importantly, the viewing community got involved. Everyday Americans said, I'm going to cancel my subscriptions. I'm going to Hulu or Disney Plus. I'm going to keep this in the conversation. I'm going to keep talking about this with my friends. I'm going to keep talking about this on social media. That made it a continuing news story that organizations knew that they wanted to keep speaking to. And that brought about a change, because I think intuitively Americans and students, hopefully too, understood that, as Jimmy Kimmel said, the show is not important. The fact that a show like this can exist in this country that speaks out against the people in power, that is important. And people realized that Jimmy Kimmel probably would have been fine no matter what happened to him, but that we would have had our rights infringed on, because once again, we would not be able to receive information. It was our free speech rights to receive different points of view that were being under attack. So I think that, in general, as a free speech person, I think that the solution to bad speech and to bad threats on our speech is more speech. And in this case, I think there was an inspiring result from that more speech.
So well put.
Thank you.
So well put. I love that. You said it far better than I would, but would love to say it that way. So you did it. Uh, for our listeners who are trying to do all that they can to stand up for democracy, what's one small step that they can take to stand up for free expression? And I know you just outlined a lot of
Yeah.
what we could do in terms of canceling subscriptions, making phone calls, working collectively. But for the individual who often feels overwhelmed, because in America we've got so much going on, so many people asking us to do so many things, but we have to pare it down and focus. And so when it comes to free speech specifically, what are small steps that we can take?
Well, I think it's so important to think small, because both that's all we can sort of do as individuals, but also that's where you can have the greatest impact. So I tell these stories about the Supreme Court because ultimately it's a clear way of defining not only our rights, but how the justices view the meaning of America. But free speech violations or free speech issues happens every day in ways that are never going to get to the Supreme Court. And individuals can make a difference by acting local and thinking about fighting for free speech as a grassroots activity. And I mean how to do that specifically is picking one type of organization. Pick something like your school board or your community board or your city council meetings. Pick one thing that you are interested in and try and be a participant in that. And that can, sometimes that means protest, but often that just means showing up. Because when people talk about sort of parental choice as an excuse for censorship, they are talking about usually an incredibly small amount of parents who are the ones who are protesting. We're actually not talking about the majority of parents who do want those books read, or at least want them not limited. So if you are physically there, if you are physically at those school board meetings when restrictions are about to be imposed, if you are at those city council meetings where somebody's saying, let's, not allow in this type of discussion at our meeting, you can then make a big difference, not only in sort of bringing up First Amendment issues or law because you understand it, but just physically being there can be either a deterrent for sort of censorship forces or an encouraging team for promoting free expression and free speech. So I say act local, pick one community or organization or part of government that you are going to be involved in, and you will find that you can have an enormous impact. Perhaps not on the national level, but that all of these local instances really add up to change on the bigger picture.
It makes a difference. It totally makes a difference. And what great advice. I love that. Ian, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for this powerful conversation and for your work in making free speech law accessible and urgent for everyone. For our listeners, defending democracy requires all of us. I invite you to support Defense of Democracy as one of the organizations, as Ian was just expressing and talking about getting involved. Get involved in Read Out Across America. Take a stand against censorship. Every voice and every story matters in shaping our future. I want to thank you all for listening. I'm Addison K. Witt, and this is the Defense of Democracy podcast. I'll see you next time.
Defense of Democracy is the only national, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting our schools and libraries from attacks by anti-government extremist organizations like Moms for Liberty. We count on listeners like you to support our work. If you would like to make a tax-deductible donation to Defense of Democracy, please visit defenseofdemocracy.org and click support. 100% of your contribution helps our work, including the production of this podcast. If you are a business and would like to learn about corporate sponsorships of the podcast, which start at $250 per month, please contact info@defenseofdemocracy.org.